Thank you very much for having me, and congratulations on another fantastic year as a society. I'm going to very briefly talk to you about a couple of trips that I've had in this area, this small area of the planet that we're looking at here, that stretches from the Caribbean down to Cape Town and up to Europe. This was the first mad idea that popped into my mind. I had left university after 2 very successful years, if we're looking at the rowing or the partaking in beer enterprises. Academically, they'd not been as successful. I was left with a blank calendar and not much idea of what I was going to do. However, having seen a documentary about a man who cycled around the planet and endorsing my love of Africa, I thought this could be an excellent opportunity to combine the two. I explained my idea to my mother and father. Dad said, "Excellent, can I come?" Mum looked at me as though I'd finally lost my marbles. Nevertheless, I found myself only 2.5 months later, at this point in front of Marble Arch in the centre of London, with a bicycle packed full of things, waving goodbye to my family. I departed on January the 2nd, and this next slide will show you why that was a relatively poor idea. I had the perfect cycle gear I had meticulously planned for the summer of Africa. I arrived in France to find blizzards and temperatures of -10. My bags look quite full, but they're actually relatively empty because I'm wearing most of the clothes that I brought with me. Nevertheless, after a period of 22 days and 2,000 kilometers, I arrived in Rome and was then able to fly over to Cairo to begin my African adventures. This chap with the camel only charged me 50 local units to take a photo of him and his camel. I took the photo, he then extorted the money out of me later. Great first lesson in Africa. This was my route through the north of Africa. Now, people hear the word Sudan and they think, always in the news for the wrong reasons. But actually, the areas I was traveling through, the northern and eastern parts, are very tame. In fact, hardly any police around at all due to the very low crime rates. The south and the west, obviously very war-torn. But this northern sector of Sudan turned out to be one of the most testing parts of the entire journey. I remember stopping and taking this photo because I thought, oh look, there's actually something that I can see either side of the road. Normally, just flat desert. For the length of Britain, from when you arrive from Egypt into the country to when you arrive at the capital, Khartoum, there is around 1,000 kilometers of perfectly straight, flat road. Temperatures between 45 and 50 Celsius in the middle of the day. And it reminded me, it came into my mind of what it might be like to be in purgatory. You get up in the morning, pack everything up onto the bike, cycle until it's too hot, lay in the sun, cycle again, repeat the process, and there are just mile markers down the road, and you go for a week, and the number has just got smaller, but as far as you're aware, you may not have moved. You may have gone round in a giant circle. This was the normal outlook from the side of the road. Again, I stopped because there was actually something to take a photo of. At this point, a cow that had reached the end of its days. This was my normal nighttime plan for the desert. I started by simply laying out my sleeping bag on the sand, not bothering to pitch the tent because the likelihood of rain was very small. However, I woke up one morning to discover lots of tracks around me, some in S shapes and some more scuttle-like, and I realized that my sleeping body's warmth was actually a bit of a magnet for local wildlife, not much of which looked very friendly. So from then on, I decided to pitch the tent, keep the crawlies out. Now, from London to the end of Sudan, the topography had been almost entirely flat. I had a couple of little lumps as I was coming through northern Italy, but otherwise it had been completely flat. And obviously I'd trained in the area of Suffolk, which notoriously mountainous, obviously. And then I arrived at this. This is the first large mountain in Ethiopia, and taller than the Alps by almost 1,000 meters in places. It rather took me by surprise. And I found myself exhausted day to day simply by the climbs and was not achieving the mileage that I wanted to. Nevertheless, found my way through Ethiopia into Kenya and eventually into Uganda and the equator. It was soon after that that I had the biggest problem of the entire trip, after I'd done some laundry. Sorry. This is, just as a matter of interest, all of the clothing that I took with me, and that was actually the highest amount that I ever carried with me. A few cycle tops, some t-shirts, a few socks, and plenty of bike gear. But that's all I had with me for 7 months. This was a little problem I ran into. That would be the car that I got into after a little spill with a taxi. I was in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, when a taxi took me by surprise by performing an extremely ambitious overtake and then slamming to a stop. I went flying through its rear window and received an injury, leaving most of the lower half of my face hanging off. I did have a slide. I sent it in for use this evening, and I think it was Joe that received it and said, "I like the slides, apart from the one that nearly made me lose my lunch." So I've removed that one, just in case. I received 42 stitches to the lower half of my face and had a serious quandary as to whether to carry on, but after a quick Skype call with my parents, realised that really there was only one option, and that was to rest up, do it properly, and get on. I was very lucky that my body was fine. My face just needed a little bit of time to recover. This was the lower half of my route. You can see the red part in the centre was where I took a ferry down the side of Tanzania. The roads in western Tanzania were too washed out for me to take on at that time. There were vehicles getting stuck in the mud, so I thought I'm not going to bother on a bicycle, and I needed some time to recover. I rejoined in northern Zambia, and after several thousand miles through much more pleasant countries in the south with better roads, better infrastructure, I arrived in Cape Town and the Cape of Good Hope after, I have some figures here, 200 days, 17 countries travelled through, 20 flat tyres, 3.5 million pedal rotations, 42 stitches to the face, 6 tyres worn through, 3 rear wheels I'd managed to break, 34 moving components on the bike were replaced, and around 2 million calories expended in the space of 200 days. My greatest joy of the entire experience was I managed to raise around £22,000 for Malaria Consortium. I undertook the venture after contracting malaria myself a couple of years before the trip. So the ability to provide nets to those in Central Africa that can't afford them has brought me great joy. On to the next. Shortly after my return from Africa, 2 of my friends from university revisited me to remind me of a conversation we'd had in the pub. This is where all of the great conversations happen, obviously, where we talked about rowing the Atlantic. And I said, yeah, let's do it. But the things that are said after a couple of pints don't always come to pass. But they said, no, it must be done. So I entered into an agreement with these other 3 gentlemen. The one in the middle, his name is Hugo. He broke his spine at the age of 17, diving into the sea in Cornwall, and received fantastic support from a charity called Spinal Research. So the whole idea was to raise as much money as we could for spinal research. This was our boat, tentatively named at the last minute the Spinal Frontier. Custom built from a very thin layer of carbon fibre, 2 thin layers of carbon fibre. It was around 8 millimeters thick, which is really nothing, and actually sleeping in the right-hand side of the vessel as you see it. When a wave hit, you could feel the side move, but we were assured it was more than strong enough, being made from the same materials that Formula One cars are, and seeing that the crashes that they can endure. On the 5th of December 2011, we departed from La Gomera in the Canary Islands, the 4 of us, pointing out to sea and hoping for the best. What followed was 9 days of pretty intense storms. We were achieving fantastic mileages through the day. unbelievably, 80 miles completed in a day is a fantastic mileage when you're talking about rowing the Atlantic. Slightly faster than you can walk normally. Soon we found ourselves looking at almost nothing. This was the view in all directions as far as we could see, almost bar exception, for around 6 weeks. I always say that crossing the Atlantic was a lot like 90% boring, 5% extremely exciting, and 5% painful. The 5% of the time you're in utter agony. 90% of the time it's just tired and waiting for the next shift. This was food, unbelievably. Thousands upon thousands of these shiny packets hidden below the decks. There were about 4 varieties, and I think we would have quite liked 54 varieties. I found that I was seasick to a level where consuming the food was quite difficult, so I ended up leading the weight loss at 16 kilograms, or just about 3 stone, for the 6 weeks that we were at sea. This did mean, however, sometimes we had to improvise. We soon found that we could be quite clever fishermen if we wanted to, and these guys were actually quite tasty if you put a bit of artificial lemon juice on them. We used what we could. Storms. Now, storms are difficult in a boat twice the size of a Volkswagen Golf at the best of times, when you're looking at waves sometimes well above the height of the tree here, in a boat that's roughly this high off the ground. However, if you introduce nighttime and cloud cover to that, you can't really see further than about a meter, let alone the wave the size of a building that's coming towards you. It made things really quite exciting. This was one of the more liberating days of my life. We found one day calm enough. Ordinarily, if you fall into the water, the boat will be swept from you sooner than you can swim back to it. However, a couple of days it was calm enough. This was actually Christmas Eve. It was calm enough for us to jump into the water, and what you can't see below the water is the 4 of us are actually holding onto a rope connected to the boat for dear life. Have you got the rope? I've got the rope. Have you got the rope? I've still got the rope. But a fantastic, fantastic experience to be swimming in water almost 5 miles deep. This was communication. This is Christmas Day. We had around 17 minutes worth of call time available to each of us a week, on our pre-agreed budget of call time. So this is me on the line to Suffolk Radio on the morning of Christmas Day. The best time of day I found was always sunset. We started to see a little glow on the horizon. We kidded ourselves. We thought it can't really be what we think it is. As the light came up, we started to see colours, and we could smell the land. It's the most amazing thing to be able. You can't smell anything at sea other than salt. You get closer to the land, and you can smell trees and earth. It's fantastic. We crossed the finish line, which is the line of longitude north of the tip of Barbados, in a time of 41 days, 23 hours and 36 minutes, becoming the youngest 4-man crew ever to row an ocean, and one of the fastest 4-man crossings ever of the Atlantic. I believe we're 4th of all time. The Coast Guard really took exception to us doing that, but we didn't know the rules. We were called into immigration to show our passports, and then shortly into the Coast Guard's office for a real telling off. I think he told us off for about twice the time he would have done, but we had enormous great grins on our faces. That was the end of the second of my large adventures, and fantastically we managed to raise, once the boat had sold recently, our total is now up to £310,000 for spinal research, an absolutely unbelievable amount of money. And it culminated last summer in my being able to run with the Olympic torch in Melton. What a fantastic day. It was meant to rain, the sun came out. I felt like an international superstar for about 15 minutes. It was fantastic to see the Suffolk roads lined 5 deep with people. That is a short description of the two of my adventures. My parents are sitting directly in front of me, so I have nothing further planned at all. I would like at this point to invite any questions if anyone does have any. On the cycle, starting off relatively little, I knew I had to get to Rome in 22 days, and that established a good level of fitness to be able to take on the African roads, a little more difficult, but roughly speaking about 80 miles a day, I'd say, on average. The most challenging, I don't think I'll ever be able to forget night shifts when you can't see, when there's no moon and you can't see where you're going. I'd say that's probably pushed me to the limit more. Plus on the cycle, if having a really awful time, I could at least stop, put my tent up and rest myself.
Obviously with your cycle ride, you obviously had a backup crew because you were not carrying spare wheels, etc. What happened in rowing across the Atlantic if something broke? Something broke, and things regularly broke. We employed our apparently very skilled bodging abilities. We had a medium-sized toolkit. I'll never meet the inventor of the zip tie, but if I do, I shall shake his hand firmly, because by the time we arrived in Barbados, most of our boat was made of zip ties. On the cycle ride, I had to make things up as I went along, finding tools and bits here and there, and when I needed spare, if I needed a rear wheel, I had to work out a way to get that over from Europe.
Can I ask you a question, Adam? What do you think were the three most important things you've learnt about yourself as a result of these adventures?
Right. The first one is probably that whatever the body tells you it can do, it can always do more. It's always the mind that lets you down. Your body says, I just can't do it anymore. Mind can just go and go and go. The next is seemingly impossible financial targets. For example, raising the £90,000 we needed to fund our row can be done if enough effort is put in. That's not necessarily about myself, but that felt like the biggest obstacle to the second adventure. And the third one is, don't follow your nose, it doesn't know the right way. I set off from Marble Arch in completely the wrong direction, and it was my mother going, made me turn round. I've mentioned the night shifts, but there's a constant battle on the Atlantic to keep your boat facing into the waves. The moment you're side onto the waves, you're in real peril. And there was one double set of waves, it hit the front, turned us sideways, the next one almost rolled us. We came back and the boat was listing at about 45 degrees. We had no ability to row the boat round back into the waves, and I could see another couple of big waves coming, and I thought, might be in really serious trouble here. And one of the oars had broken out of the rollock at the time, and it was just sitting there and heaving the oars as hard as we could to get it back. But that's probably one of the most scared times I've been in my life.